Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whatever your time zone, welcome. This is Digital Transformation Talk, and I am your host, Kevin Crane. Welcome to the show. We're back from our summer hiatus and into our fall season, and we're here today talking about driving innovation in healthcare through digital transformation. I spent many years in healthcare. I was a mid-level executive in charge of a variety of information technology groups across 3 states here in the US. So I'm not unfamiliar with both the technologies involved and the business processes involved in a large health insurance provider. But of course, that only scratches the surface of the breadth and depth of digital technologies across the healthcare sector. Excuse me. As you would expect, healthcare organizations spend a ton of money on technology. Spending in the US healthcare market is valued at $191 billion. That was last year in 2022, and is projected to reach over $170 billion by 2027. Now, extrapolate that spending worldwide, and well, as I said, healthcare organizations spend a ton on technology. And while there is no exact number, a study by Computer Economics shows that healthcare organizations, again in the US for reference, spend somewhere between 3 and 6% of their total revenue on IT. This spending is in line with other industry segments like transportation and logistics, retail, e-commerce. They're all coming in at about 5%. Financial services is a bit higher at 10%. But tech companies and software providers spend a lot more, as much as 25% of their total revenue on IT. So in comparison with other industries, this has led to some speculation about healthcare and innovation and digital transformation. Some question whether innovations in healthcare are moving fast enough. And it's certainly true that new technologies are reshaping the healthcare industry. Hospitals are adopting virtual reality, robotics, artificial intelligence. Insurers are employing tools like artificial intelligence, machine learning. But are innovations in healthcare really moving fast enough? It certainly doesn't appear to be keeping pace with other industries. One study found that healthcare firms typically lag behind about a decade other industries. This lag is largely driven by the unique requirements of healthcare regulations, coupled with the high sensitivity of patient data, and of course the initial cost of digitization. All of this is placing a unique burden on technical advancement and innovation in the healthcare sector. So today, let's examine some routes that we can take that will help drive innovation in healthcare through digital transformation. What transformation challenges face healthcare CTOs today, and what should they do about them? What best practices should we consider when it comes to patient data and privacy, for example? And ultimately, what can the industry do to catch up? That's what we'll be discussing today with a great panel of guests driving innovation in healthcare through digital transformation. But quickly, before I introduce our guests today, I do want to say that we want to hear from you too. We'd like to encourage everyone attending today to participate. So please join in with your comments in the chat section. And if you have a question along the way for our guests, please enter them into the chat, and I will attempt to get some of them into the flow of the show today. And we'll have a few minutes also at the end for your questions. All right. With that, let's bring aboard our guests today, starting with Zoe Healy, Associate Partner at .io Health. Zoe, are you with us today?
Hi, I certainly am, and really looking forward to the discussion.
Hello, Zoe. It's great to have you with us. Where are you calling in from today?
I'm calling in from the Kent coast in England.
Very nice. Well, thank you so much for being with us this evening or this afternoon. Also joining us is Van Vertnick, Client Director at Parsec Group. Van, are you with us?
Hi, hi everyone.
Hello, Van. It's great to have you with us too, Van. Where are you calling in from?
I'm calling in from London.
London, very good. All right, very good, Van. Thank you so much for joining us today. Also with us is Joe Max Wakeham, Vice Director of Health for the Copenhagen Institute for Futures Studies. Joe, welcome aboard. Where are you calling in from?
Thank you, Kevin. I'm actually in Switzerland now, in Lausanne.
Very nice, very nice. Have not visited Switzerland. That is on my bucket list. So welcome, Joe. Thank you so much for being with us. And finally, Chris Winder, Director of Marketing for Developer Cloud and OEM at OpenText. Chris, are you with us, and where are you calling in from today?
Good morning, good afternoon. I'm in the other London. I'm in London, Ontario, just halfway in between Detroit and Toronto in Canada.
Very nice. Well, welcome aboard, everyone. I am coming to you from the West Coast of the United States, so we're covering pretty much the globe today. So thank you so much for being with us. I would like to point briefly our attention to an article, a news article published recently by Tech Monitor that focused on the National Health Service in the UK that talks about a new study that found that outdated IT equipment and a digital skills gap is hindering efforts at the NHS for digital transformation. Guys, it's a rather damning report that reveals that the health service's digital journey has been slow, with legacy IT systems one of the key barriers to progress. It basically says that the NHS lacks the most basic functioning IT equipment, ouch, and that previous attempts to digitally transform have been thwarted by legacy systems that just simply couldn't handle the demands of modern systems. It also warns that the NHS needs to offer higher salaries to digital workers in order to be able to compete with the private sector, and that a digital skills gap in the NHS is desperately hindering progress and needs to be addressed. Ultimately, according to the study, the UK is lagging behind the US in digital transformation of healthcare records. So my question to the group is, do you feel this is a correct assessment? And if so, why is the NHS so far behind the curve? And what can the NHS do about it? I'll start with you, Zoe. What's your opinion about this new study?
I think the report is really reflecting a real situation. What's interesting to me is the situation that the NHS is facing, whilst sounding very dire, is actually similar to a lot of health systems around the world, whether it be healthcare systems themselves or organizations and companies commercializing health solutions. And one of the main issues that's raised, of course, is that one of the challenges of legacy systems is they can't talk to one another. And the biggest problem worldwide in healthcare systems is the lack of connectedness across the system, across the patient pathway. So for me, that's at the heart of the challenge we need to solve for the NHS.
A lack of connectedness. We may talk about, I may ask you about that, Zoe, here in a moment, but Zan, what's your opinion of this new study, and what can the NHS do to catch up?
Yeah, I think this is a very accurate reflection of where NHS is on the digital journey, but also I think it's very important to really start closing the digital gap, but this digital gap that will include clinicians, patients, and it will be able to deliver better outcomes. I would say leave legacy IT systems behind and also focus on interoperability. So whenever you are transforming a service or implementing any sort of system, they should adhere to healthcare IT standards. And this is exactly something that Zoe pointed out, and which I fully agree with. Interoperability and healthcare IT standards is something that can allow you to safely and securely, of course, transfer patient data from one organization to another. Although those capabilities are very different and they vary from system to system. So whenever thinking about replacing a system, I think this is something that should be taken into consideration.
All right, Joe, what is your opinion about this new study? Do you feel that it's correct? And what about the digital skills gap that is being pointed out as one of the barriers for innovation at the NHS?
Well, I've been following the UK digital transformation for almost 20 years. And some attempts were done 15, 16 years ago with a lot of investments, and they have failed. Healthcare is very complex. What's outlined in the study isn't anything new. It was outlined in the studies a few years ago and a few years before that, and there's significant challenges. I mean, large-scale transformations on this scale are extremely complex. The legacy systems don't necessarily mean that they have to be replaced sometimes, except when they constitute significant security issues or connectivity issues, because the holy grail of healthcare is to be able to provide what we call care continuity. So somebody starts their care journey with one physician in one location and is able to move to another one and another one, and their record would follow them. And that's why interconnectivity or health information exchange is so important. So a lot of the components that are right now in the UK health system make it very difficult for this to happen. And a lot of investments are required, whether it's in the infrastructure, in the devices, and more importantly, in the workforce, which we can talk about in a bit.
All right. Very good. Some more things to unpack there, Joe. But Chris, before we get too far into the weeds, what's your take on this new study? Do you feel it's fair? And what should the NHS do to finally catch up?
Yeah, I think it's very fair. But I think one of the things we need to point out is that it's not the NHS. It's healthcare everywhere. It's not that the NHS is particularly incompetent compared to its peers in any other country or any hospital system. It's the system that sucks, not the people. And I think that's where, some of my friends who are doctors and nurses in the NHS system, I think that's where we get ourselves into trouble, is because each group continues to have this razor focus on their problems. And so you always get into the hamster wheel of death, that we never look at, okay, are there examples of how we do this better? We can't continue to rely on ourselves to come up with an answer because we're not coming up with a new answer. To the points that have already been made, I think the real question becomes, can we think about this differently? I think one of the things that we've done recently is we just finished a hackathon. We said, you know what? Let's take all of our services that are healthcare related and say, if we put these in the hand of a developer, what would the patient experience look like? And so we learned two things. We learned that developers are really excited about healthcare, and we learned that they're really scared about healthcare. But if you put the right experts in front of them to let them understand what the requirements are for healthcare, which we did, the answers and the questions you get are mind-bogglingly awesome. Like, it was just a phenomenal, we're looking at this and I'm going, how do we help this team get this out and get their message out? Because they have the right thought.
Well, interesting, Chris, and I'll put this out to the entire group. I mean, is it really something that is prevalent across the healthcare industry, perhaps in the UK, or is it the NHS specifically? I mean, we're seeing stats that are showing that the NHS is desperately behind the US in terms of its transformation, and that the UK is lagging behind the US in digital transformation of healthcare records, for example. So is it a UK centric thing, or it seems to be, or is it across healthcare worldwide? What's the group's feeling about the position of NHS in this context? Are they somehow lagging for a reason due to the nature of the business of NHS, or is it healthcare digitization in general? Chris, what's your feeling on that?
Well, I think the U.S. its superiority often gets overstated because there's 3 or 4 super systems that are well and truly above everybody else. But if you look below the Mayos and the Stanfords and Deakin and a couple other enormous hospitals, you see the same thing. 80% of all Americans live in a healthcare desert. Healthcare desert. Okay. We have a name for it in the US and North America and in Europe. So I think sometimes the US gets pushed forward as being well and truly ahead. I think there are hospitals within the US that are well and truly ahead. But I think at the systems level, I don't think the US as a whole country is that far ahead of the UK or France or Canada.
All right. Joe, Zan, Zoe, you have something to add to this idea that NHS is somehow farther behind than they should be, or what's your take on all of this?
I mean, look, I think Chris's point that, there are pockets of brilliance in the US, there are pockets of brilliance everywhere, including in places where we don't even think to look. If you actually go and ask local health systems in Africa how they solve problems like this, if you look all around the world, you'll find amazing examples. But to Chris's point, you need to be talking outside your own circle. And I won't belabor the finding of the report about the need for investment, but clearly that's, as you pointed out in your introduction, something that's important.
All right, fair enough. We're not here to beat up on the NHS. We're here to talk about the healthcare industry as a whole around the world, which brings us to our points for discussion today. And the first point is, what digital transformation challenges face healthcare CTOs today? What lessons can be learned? What ways can we overcome the barriers? Zen, what is your take on this? What challenges specifically do you feel that healthcare CTOs face today, and what should they do about it?
Yeah, I think to really solve a problem within healthcare, technology is just the mean, or I would say a necessary intervention that can be implemented. But the problem should be first of all found, then solved, and then there should be a solution for that. And I think that many times we start with the problem definition on the side of the solution rather than to really find the problem, define it, and then define objectives. And I think when it comes to digital health and innovation, those digital tools can be used to enhance care, but they should also not be framed in a way that there should be a replacement for a face-to-face support. There should be a support, and it's important to have still patient-centric approach whereby digital tools can be offered as part of a wider set of options. And this is based on individuals' preferences. We also need to make sure that the team who is using those solutions, they have the right skill set. The digital maturity between NHS trusts within the country, and I would say even globally, varies. The same thing is, the systems as such are multi-complex factors that can influence patient uptake and engagement with digital tools. Such as, I think it's very important to include clinicians from the start, include end users from the start, and they should be included into the decision-making process. Many times decisions are made on a very high C-level execs, and not on the way that they would be suggested or, let's say, in any way included from other peers or clinicians or the actual end users.
Do you think it might be, though, Zan, sometimes the framing of the problem? Because I know when I've done hospital implementations, when I was boots on the ground, we'd often frame it to the doctors as being about their experience rather than talking about that, as you mentioned, the continuum of health. And as Joe Max talked about. Do you think sometimes, I feel like sometimes I've been in the room and you frame the problem in such a way that you know the answer, rather than giving them the opportunity to give you some unique insight. And I think that's what it feels like that's one of the things that we've gotten ourselves into trouble in healthcare with digital transformations. We know the answer we want because we know what we can afford to do as IT. So we give them this option that sounds really good, but then we don't ask them their opinion on, the big picture of what they actually came to healthcare to do, which is support patients and get better health outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree. And I believe that digital transformation really starts after the go live. Most of the resources are usually devoted into the first stage, in the stage of analysis, implementation, UAT, and testing. But it really happens, the magic happens after you go live. So it's not just about achieving objectives, but making sure that organizations, once all the consulting partners and everyone else who's been involved into this, they can sustain them as well. And I think this should be one of the main goals.
Brilliantly boring is what we used to call it.
Yeah.
And of course, that post-go live, if you've got your systems set up correctly to talk to one another, but you've also framed part of the problem as how do we assess how we're doing, then you can follow the continual quality improvement. So part of that systems design, user-centered, needs to be how are we actually tracking through from what we did to what happened as a result to whether there was a beneficial outcome, so that we can really continue to evolve over time.
Yeah, I think one of the most successful projects we did, we used Kanban as part of the solution. So the Toyota methodology of here's a change. Was that better? Okay. Can we leave it? What else should we change? Rather than trying to eat the whole apple in one bite. I think that I learned that from an old CMIO, and he's like, if you come to me with the whole problem, I'm gonna have you walked out of this. Fix this one problem first, and then let's move on. And my apologies, Joe Max, I interrupted you.
No, then that's fine, Chris. Thanks. No, I mean, I agree with you. I agree with Zoe, and apologies.
All right. Earlier, we were talking, and it relates to this. What are challenges that are facing healthcare CTOs today? Earlier, I heard from this group a lack of connectedness, a need to leave legacy systems behind, or maybe not, a skills gap. These are big challenges that healthcare CTOs face, organizations as a whole. What should we do about connectedness, legacy systems, and a skills gap? Joe Max, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, well, first, I agree with everything that was said, but there's also something very important that we often tend to forget, especially if you're sitting as a CTO or you're in charge of the technical aspect of the healthcare transformation, is that these projects are not technical projects. They're not IT projects. They're healthcare transformation projects. So it's truly it's a clinical transformation journey, as we would call it. And at the head of that journey, what we need is really a healthcare digital leader. So somebody who's got clinical background, understand the clinical standards of care, understands the needs extremely well, and then they can articulate them so that the technical team can actually translate them into what needs to be done. So as Dan was saying initially, technology is just a means to an end. And so it's very important that we make sure that upfront, it's the clinical leaders that are leading this project. So one of the first challenges of a CTO is actually submitting to that and making sure that they're going to follow the prioritization of what the clinical leaders decide are the priorities are important. And at the same time, they need to build that infrastructure. They need to make sure that they use the standards needed to create that continuity of care. And they need to build in the security that creates resilience, business continuity, so that those systems can actually function in a reliable way.
What about the idea of leaving behind legacy systems? Large organizations still are relying on legacy systems for very core processes.
Right.
The cost of conversion can be high. The reliance on these systems can be very high. So what's the group's take on leaving behind legacy systems? Is it absolutely a requirement to move forward in a real way or not?
If I may say a few words.
Please.
So the legacy system, the definition, if you ask somebody what does a legacy system means, okay, you'll get different definitions. But a legacy system, typically, if it's been here for 10, 20 years, that means it works, okay? Or at least its purpose, right? So there is some level of reliability in a legacy system. The challenge is, will it provide for the future? Is it scalable? Is it connectable? Can it be made to connect, and can it be made to reliably provide information? I mean, some of the best EHRs out there, and Chris and the team can basically attest to that, are legacy systems. They've been around for 40 years. So, but they've modernized themselves over the years. But at the core, even in banking, systems are 50 years old, the ones that work, and people don't dare to touch the core.
I know. I know. Would you want to touch it if it's been working for 20, 30, 40, 50 years? But part of that also is part of the compelling reason to move away from legacy systems, perhaps, you folks tell me, is, again, a people thing. We're talking about a skills gap. I mean, let's face it, legacy systems based upon certainly mainframe systems, that skill set is an aging skill set. The workers that are adept in those systems are aging out of the workforce. Younger folks are coming on board. There may or may not be that type of skill set available to the degree that it was. So are legacy systems and a skill gap sort of feeding each other's self-fulfilling prophecy? Zoe, you have a thought on that?
I'm interested in another side of the skills gap as well, which actually Joe started to talk about when he talked about a technology officer has to talk to the clinical experts. I think one of the future skill sets we're going to need even more is actually the end user understanding. So thinking about perspectives from the non-expert, who is actually the main expert because they're the recipient of this. So I would suggest that a patient-focused mindset and an idea of systems design designed around the end user with the input from the experts who are also interacting with the system, exactly as Chris described, is an important skill set that is lacking at not necessarily the C-suite level, but the next level down. Yeah. So really, the industry needs to change the way it's thinking from a clinician expert, alone driven, to a co-creation between all of these different people.
All right.
Yeah, and I think we often see that we don't bring in the rest of the care team, right? We focus so much on the doctor, we forget how little the doctor does in actual care. Let's just be honest. Yes. You could get rid of doctors, and if you still had the nurses, 90% of all healthcare would still be just fine. And so we often don't have them as a key participant, even though they're the ones who can translate what the doctor is thinking, what the surgeon does, what the surgeon needs. They're the ones that deal with the day-to-day care. Like, they're the ones who drive the system. So nurses and nurse practitioners are often left behind in these conversations. So, you know, Zoe, to your point, if we want it to be better and more patient-centric, internally we have to think about who actually touches who actually works with the patient on a day-to-day basis, not just who floods in, looks at a chart and goes, "You'll be just fine. See the nurse on the way out." Which I know is apocryphal and probably, you know, I'm going to get a lot of bad text messages from my doctor friends, but I think in a private moment they would agree that there's a nugget of truth in what I said.
All right. Now, Zan,
I fully agree with.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, just to my sense to the previous topic. So co-creation with the end users, but we have two end users. We have, if you really want to improve efficiency within healthcare, then you have clinical users, healthcare professionals, and you have patients. So taking into account also the experience of healthcare professionals as well. On one side, they have so many cumbersome processes, so many manual inputs, because their systems cannot talk to each other. So most of the time, what they have to do, they have to copy and paste from one system to another. So imagine that you need to do this 100, 300 times per day. How many times can be saved? And you know what struck me recently, I had a conversation with one of the clinicians, and they spend most of the time on the administrative tasks rather than spending time with patients. So there should be a significant shift into that. They should be spending more time with the patients. We have technology and automation workflows that could help them to really bring their efficiency up. Sorry, Kevin. Yeah.
All right.
One more aspect to this is that so the workforce is super important. Designing around the end users, whether the physicians, nurses, or patients, is the most important part, as was mentioned. But there's another thing that's part of the change management when we implement such systems, is to also accept some of the facts. In the past, what used to happen is implementations used to fail because the expectations were not set. Technology has issues and has problems. And from the outset, it's important to make sure that the leadership conveys to the entire team in a hospital or in a healthcare system that problems will happen with technology. There will be interruptions. There are things that require still 40 clicks instead of 3 clicks, or copying and pasting where needed, because it's a transition towards, you know, a better future. So everybody has to accept that it's work in progress, and then whenever there is an issue, then help each other out to solve it, not point it as a problem and knock down the entire system because one particular feature isn't working.
All right. I am cognizant of our time, so I do want to move us on to our next discussion point, and that has to do with patient data and privacy and compliance. That's a big subject. We talk all day about that. But we're here talking about, is innovation in healthcare technology moving quickly enough? Why is it lagging behind other industries as much as a decade? Studies are telling us that this lag is largely driven by the unique requirements of healthcare organizations, coupled with the sensitivity of patient data and the cost of digitization. Let's talk about patient data and privacy. Navigating certainly the regulatory and compliance controls during a digital transformation effort are a huge undertaking, but certainly overall, just in our everyday existence in the industry, constantly worrying about patient data loss, cyber threats, and hacking. Is that one of the reasons why we feel that healthcare perhaps is lagging behind other organizations, like say in technology or software, in terms of digital transformation? Chris, what's your take on all of this?
I feel like it's a bit of a boogeyman. I think we've overstated it I think 5 years ago, absolutely. 7 years ago, completely agree. In the last 3 years, so much has changed for digital security in IT systems. Healthcare isn't that much more onerous as far as its security needs as mobile banking or other parts. There's some nuance on the exact pieces that you need, but if you strip away healthcare versus finance and you just look at the requirements and what needs to be done on the technical side, not too much more difficult. It requires that intimate knowledge of healthcare in the logic to think about this as a problem of securing the data rather than a problem of locking down the data. But I don't think the newest technologies are that far off. I mean, the new fire standards are great. They ease security pieces. The level of encryption that you can do on ingress and egress, a lot of those concerns that existed before don't exist. I mean, paper's less secure than a lot of the new digital systems.
Interesting take on that. Now, Joe, Max, you agree with Chris about this idea of security and privacy?
Yes.
No longer really an excuse for lagging behind?
Yeah, I don't think it's a technology issue. I mean, the technology we're using in healthcare, as you said, is a decade old or more. And some of these things, whether it's standards, communication, exchange of informations, have become possible. Obviously, they require investment and technical implementation. But I think we still need to work on the people part of things, the human part of things, the acceptance to do certain things. When it comes to personalized health experience, it's about changing perception, changing behavior, accepting individuals to share their information or to allow the sharing of their information for the better good and the better betterment of themselves as well. And so there's still that needs to be worked on. The technology, I think, piece, as Chris was saying, is there. We need to work on the human aspect and the perception and building the trust that is needed that makes these things happen faster.
Yeah.
And Zan, what about you? Zan and Zoe? Yeah, please jump in. What are your thoughts on patient data privacy loss, regulatory compliance controls, and so forth?
Yeah, I completely agree with Joe Max that actually if we had the value proposition built around what people are telling us that they want out of healthcare, so that we enable them to understand the value of data sharing, then we can hope to achieve the mindset shift against any concerns that may not actually be founded in the reality of our technology, which most people don't understand, to be fair. Of course, human error is much more likely than technology error in terms of a release of data, but of course the concern is about mass release or mass access when you have bigger and bigger systems. So that's understandable, but in the end, if we can improve societal and individual care experiences through supporting data sharing, and everyone understands and is willing to commit to that, isn't that a wonderful thing?
Mm-hmm. Very good.
I fully agree with that. And I think that this should be the forefront of any digital intervention within healthcare. Also, I think it's important to talk about control. Control should always remain with the hands of the patients or their legal guardians. And technology is there to support that and to enable that control. There are standards, and previously mentioned were FHIR, IAG, HL7, Open, EHR. Those standards help for patients to give or revoke consent. And especially if you are being treated for a certain condition within the region, it's most likely that you're going to go to one hospital to another. But you would need to give them, each individual hospital, consent to share your data. But this data can be shared across health information exchange if they are, of course, even implemented. But most importantly, before when I said that we should replace legacy IT systems, and I think I'm talking about outdated systems that are quite risky and they have, I would say, higher probability of cyber attacks and any sort of data breaches. They have happened recently within the UK, within the NHS, but they should have implemented necessary safety precautions to prevent this by any means.
All right, we are here today with Zoe Healy, Associate Partner at .io Health, Zan Vertnik, Client Director at Parsec Group, Joe Max Wakeham, Vice Director of Health at the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, and Chris Winder, Director of Marketing, Developer Cloud, and OEM for OpenText. We are here today talking about driving innovation in healthcare through digital transformation. If you have a question for any of our guests, now would be the time to be thinking about that, popping it into the chat feature. We will be getting to some questions here in just a moment. But before we do, folks, I want to talk about our final discussion point today. And really it comes down, you folks were mentioning just a moment ago, an individualized or personalized patient experience. Let's talk about some of the cool things that are possible and happening in healthcare, especially with respect to the patient experience. Things like using AI for predictive analysis, using the Internet of Things or the medical Internet of Things to really up the game when it comes to a personalized, modern patient experience. What are some of the advancements that are possible and being put into place today, and what should we be doing about it to take advantage of that? Zoe, what are your thoughts on all of that?
It's all so exciting, but one thing that's particularly interesting and relevant to the discussion around the improvement of health systems and the design of these individualized patient experiences is this idea of collecting patient experience data in order to inform decision-making and design. And of course, with working with patients, we can understand what they care about, and we can design tools that can capture contextual information about their experience. Once we understand that, we can redesign systems to serve their needs and to better manage their healthcare. Understanding the symptoms that actually matter to patients, being able to capture that data en masse to inform changes in healthcare guidelines or how drugs are developed. Patient experience data could be extremely valuable for advancing healthcare, and all of these advancements that are to serve, one-on-one personalized experience improvements can also be applied to improving the systems. Mm-hmm.
And where does AI play in all of that? Zan, do you have a thought on the connective tissue between technologies like AI and the data and the perspective needed to deliver a real personalized modern patient experience?
Yeah, I think AI has been used within healthcare for quite a while, and here I'm not talking about generative AI, but more precise AI, especially within radiology and
right.
Other clinical areas. I think that it can immensely help when it comes to efficiency, but of course, very strong, rigorous governance is absolutely necessary. Here is, I would say, healthcare is the area where we shouldn't really play in the field, but we should really help and listen to experts to help us to implement AI tools into the day-to-day basis. Previously, we were talking about leveling up and scaling up the skill set of healthcare professionals. I think implementing AI tools, we're going to a step even further, but I think we first need to learn how to walk before we can run. That will be my take on this.
And what about the Internet of Things or the Internet of Medical Things? Some really cool things, really great things are happening, not only with data there, the technologies there, but also the impact to patients and clinicians. Joe Max, what's your take on the Internet of Things or the Internet of Medical Things? Where will that take us in the next few years?
Well, one thing we know is that only 30% of the data lies in the healthcare system. So a lot of the data about a person's health is actually during their daily lives, how they live, their daily activities, motion, etc. So the opportunity here is to be able to collect this data, collect through the Internet of Things or smartwatches and devices and home monitors and things like that, is to collect this bulk of 70% of the data that actually can contribute to the improvement of a person's health, or in their, hopefully, the change of their behavior towards better health practice, whether it's preventive or secondary prevention habits. So collecting, and the power of AI, because I don't call AI artificial intelligence. I prefer to call it intelligent algorithms, because they're super intelligent algorithms that can sift through all this data and then provide insights as to what needs to be done where. So better decisions on an individual's level or on a healthcare professional's level, using this data that can be captured from all of these IoTs.
Right. And Chris, put us this into perspective from a technological point of view: patient experience, AI, and predictive analysis, Internet Medical of Things. What technologies and approaches are really needed to make these things happen? And what should CTOs be doing today to position the organization to take advantage of some of these newer techniques and advantages?
Yeah, I think ironically, a lot of the technology that will make it better actually exists and can be used in conjunction with some of the legacy platform technologies. So some of the automation around the workflow, some of the pieces around bringing in smartwatches and other data sets from the personal experience, those are all using today's technology. And there are layers that you can use to then complete it. So a lot of the AI that you're seeing now, and a lot of what I've talked with the technologists and worked with the developers on, it's amazing how much you can do with a few lines of script, taking Fitbit data for one example and aligning it with a couple key parameters. And now you can then filter that out into a view that gives the care team enough information about what's going on in somebody's daily life that they can now just get a little bit better. And so and you're not making a huge investment, you're not making a huge change to your technology stack. There's pieces you can do around the edges of the patient experience and the physician experience that will help immensely. And then it shows the ROI for the bigger pieces. And then you can go. So there's a lot of existing technology around the machine learning, neural networks around OCR and ICR, the automation of the workflows. All these pieces can be added. They can be secured. They can be added in without having to do the rip and replace yet.
All right, very good. Did I interrupt, Zoe? I'm sorry, was I interrupting you? All right, very good. We are here with Zoe Healy, Zan Vertnik, Joe Max Wakeham, and Chris Winder. Folks, it's time now for questions from our attendees today. If you have a question for our panel of guests, please do enter it into the chat feature. We would love to get your questions in the time remaining that we have today. And folks, we do have a question coming in from Steve Gibson. Steve, thank you so much for your question today. And Steve says this: interoperability between different healthcare systems is crucial for the exchange of patient information. How can the lack of interoperability contribute to patient data loss? And what steps can be taken to address this issue during digital transformation initiatives? Interesting question. Anyone have a thought for Steve on that?
So it's interesting because that aligns with when I used to be a clinical researcher, that was one of the problems that we'd always have. Mm-hmm. And that would be the problem of, part of it would be really around, how do you take all the pieces that are in a paper file, if I'm reading Steve's, if I'm reading his question correctly, and then how do you combine that with the other pieces without having data loss, as in you're not aligning all the pieces correctly? I think there's no AI that's going to fix it. Putting on my technology hat. Unfortunately, I think it's just a matter of the project planning and having a step that reinforces each one of those, and then having a fixed step for later on. How do we fix this later on? It's not a very satisfying answer, but I've yet to hear of any solution that prevents data loss that we didn't know about. There's so much that is below the tip of the iceberg in healthcare, because you're talking about a 1 year to 75 to 105 year patient record. That data loss and just that amount of data just is problematic, right? And you haven't always had this continuum of care concept. I mean, Your GP didn't have to know what the surgeon did. It didn't matter to him in the 1940s because he had no part in the follow-up. So you have these problems with how we used to handle healthcare that lead to obvious parts around data loss. But it is a problem. It's just one of those good old project management problems, unfortunately.
So what you're saying is
that might not be right.
It's like a legacy mindset as opposed to legacy systems necessarily. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yeah.
All right. Very good. All right. Well, we are starting to run short on time today. So without any other questions coming in from our audience, I would like to ask each of our guests today if you would please provide us with one quick action item that our listeners can use today to take advantage of the ideas and advice. Zoe, do you have an action item for us today?
Yeah, and it's big homework, but when you're trying to do a transformation, the first thing you need to do is to think about the entire system and all of the stakeholders, exactly as we've been talking about. It might take you longer to identify what that one problem, to Chris's point, is that you want to start with. But if you don't begin by understanding the entire ecosystem and what connections may be needed in the future, you're not going to be able to do the right thing in a way that's going to require minimal major alterations in the future. So get together your patients, get together your healthcare professionals, your clinical experts, your technologists, and co-create together. It'll be amazing to see what you uncover and which opportunities you choose to focus on first.
All right, very good. That is Zoe Healy, Associate Director of .io Health. Zoe, thank you so much. Zan, do you have an action item for our listeners and viewers today?
Yeah, I don't think my advice is very similar to what Zoe just mentioned, but I would go back to something that I said at the beginning of our digital transformation talk today, which is start with finding the problem, then move towards solving it, and then come up with a solution that should be co-created with everyone who's involved, but also make sure to identify the right stakeholders, make sure that they understand how the definition of success looks like. And the process of implementing innovations and supporting people to engage can be also very, very time consuming. So make sure you account for that, and also be very resource intensive. But on the other side, don't forget about adoption and training. People need time to adapt the new way of working. They need to embrace it, and they need to embrace the change. So keep them in the loop with clear and concise communication along the way, along the implementation of the project, but also most importantly, after going live, making sure they have the right support whenever they need it.
All right, fantastic. That is Zan Vertnik, Client Director at Parsec Group. Zan, thank you so much for being with us today. Joe Max, one quick action item that we can use to take advantage of the ideas and advice today.
Well, I think it's very similar to what Zoe mentioned. The one action item I would encourage everybody to remember is that this is not that digital transformation is not an IT project. It has to be a clinical transformation journey, and it has to be led by a healthcare digital leader. And through their leadership, there needs to be a change management approach that incentivizes everybody to actually contribute, as was said, and to engage in building something that works for everybody. And along those lines, also make sure that there's a culture change that shifts the narrative from blame to collaboration. This is not working. No, let's see how we can help each other. Along with that, there's also one very important thing, that there has to be incentives to retain the existing people. What we're seeing is burnout, and people are leaving the healthcare systems everywhere, especially in the UK. And some mechanism to retain people has to be put in place.
Very good. That is Joe Max Wakeham, Vice Director of Health for the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies. Thank you, Joe Max. And finally, Chris Winder. Chris, driving innovation in healthcare through digital transformation. Can you give us one action item that we can use to take advantage of the ideas and advice today?
Yeah, and I want to take in a slightly different call to action, and I want to give you some hope. So we've just completed a hackathon. It's Hacknosis, Patient Experience Optimization. The submissions are open for anybody to take a look at. There are some phenomenal things that people are willing to think about and do that are different. And if you want some hope in what the future of healthcare looks like, start there and then work out from there, because there's some really interesting ideas that I think are implementable today. And so have some hope that these are solvable problems. Even if we can't solve the whole apple today, let's take a bite.
All right, very good. Zoe Healy, Zan Vertnig, Joe Max Wakeham, Chris Winder. Thank you, everyone. What a great panel today. Your perspectives and advice were spot on. Thank you so much. I hope we get a chance to talk again soon. And thank you to everyone joining us today. Thank you too. Please join us again next time, September 26th at 1600 British time, when we will talk with yet another great panel of experts, next time about how generative AI can enhance your organization and your digital transformation efforts. It should be another great discussion. And meanwhile, if you'd like to find me, you can do so. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect there. And check me out on my weekly audio podcast, the Digital Transformation Podcast. But with that, all that said, that'll do it for this episode of Digital Transformation Talk. We'll see you again in 2 weeks. Until then, I am Kevin Crane. Thanks for watching.